gaze. "This story isn't finished," she whispered to the shifting shadows. "Not yet." Outside, the wind stirred the brittle leaves, carrying with it the echoes of betrayal and the faintest glimmer of hope. Her fingers trembled slightly, tracing the delicate edges of a leather-bound ledger that had belonged to her mother. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows across the cracked pages, as if the very library itself were whispering secrets meant only for her to hear. Ilara's heart pounded with a mix of reverence and unease. Each letter and scrawled note hinted at a life entwined with mysteries she was only beginning to comprehend. The ledger contained entries from decades past, dates, cryptic symbols, and references to meetings in places no longer marked on any map. Her breath caught when she found a notation in a hurried hand, mentioning a gathering of the keepers and a warning about the shifting stories beneath the ivory gaze. Her mind raced back to the tales she had uncovered about the Ivory cult, the shadowy society rumored to wield control over the library's uncanny power. Could her parents have been involved? The question clawed at her, pushing her to delve deeper despite the gnawing fear that some truths might be better left buried. A sudden creak echoed through the silent hall. Ilara froze, senses sharpening. From the corner of her eye, a figure emerged, a tall, gaunt silhouette, framed by the dim glow of the overhead sconces. Professor Alden Gray's piercing blue eyes met hers with a mixture of warning and sorrow. "Ilara," he murmured, his voice low and tight. "There are paths in this library that no student should tread. Your parents' past is a labyrinth of shadows and secrets. Be cautious, some knowledge exacts a terrible price." She met his gaze steadily, the weight of his words settling heavily on her shoulders. "I have to know, Professor. If the cipher means anything, it's telling me that my parents' story is part of the cycle I'm trying to break." Gray's lips pressed into a thin line, then tread carefully. "The Ivory cult watches closely, and the library's forgotten wings hold truths that have been buried for good reason." Determined, Ilara sought out Mina Solis, whose unwavering loyalty had become her anchor in the shifting tides of paranoia and deception. Together, they navigated the labyrinthine corridors behind a false bookshelf, the cold stone walls closing in as their footsteps whispered against the granite floor. "Look here," Mina whispered, pointing to a faded inscription barely visible beneath layers of dust. "This marks the entrance to the restricted section, forgotten wings that even the librarians avoid." Ilara's pulse quickened. The cipher's hints about missing passages and blank spaces suddenly made sense. Those unwritten pages were not mere omissions, but deliberate erasures, concealing the cult's most guarded secrets. As they pressed forward, the shadows seemed to thicken, the air growing colder and heavier. Ilara's thoughts flickered to the faded note she had found earlier, tucked inside a hollowed-out volume. The trembling handwriting had urged her onward, promising revelation but warning of peril. "We're close," she said, voice steady despite the chill crawling up her spine. "My parents' fate, the cult's origins, the cipher, all of it converges here." The forgotten wings beckoned like a maw of shadow and history, a place where the past and present intertwined in a dangerous dance. Somewhere within those depths waited the answers Ilara sought, answers that might finally illuminate the path to breaking the cycle, or bind her more tightly to the fate the books had cruelly inscribed. Outside, the library's ancient clock tolled mournfully, marking the passage of time that now seemed to slip through Ilara's fingers like sand. Each moment brought her closer to the precipice, where knowledge and destiny collided in a fragile balance. Her footsteps echoed in the silence, a steady rhythm of resolve and dread as she stepped into the unknown, chasing the fading footprints of a past long obscured hoping to rewrite the story before the final page was sealed. The shadows shifted around her, and somewhere deep within the library's heart, the rewriting books stirred, as if aware that a new chapter was about to begin. Alara Whitlock sat near the back, her round glasses slipping down her nose as she fidgeted with a loose thread on her sleeve. Across the room, Jasper Lang stood confidently near the podium, his sharp eyes scanning the room until they locked on hers. A ripple of anticipation passed through the crowd. This was no ordinary class discussion. Today, Jasper was poised to challenge her, publicly and unrelentingly. Clearing his throat, Jasper began with polished ease. While I admire Ilara's enthusiasm for literary mysteries, her recent claims about a cipher predicting future crimes seem at best speculative and, at worst, a dangerous distraction from real scholarship. His voice echoed clearly, slicing through the quiet like a blade. He paced slightly, gesturing as if conducting an invisible orchestra. The idea that books rewrite themselves and foretell events is nothing more than fanciful superstition, unsupported by any tangible evidence. A few students chuckled. Others exchanged uncertain glances. Alara felt the familiar sting of embarrassment, but beneath it stirred a fierce flame of resolve. She rose slowly, steadying her voice as she replied, "Jasper, skepticism is healthy, but dismissing the cipher without engaging with the evidence does a disservice to all of us. The texts may be unstable, but the patterns within the cipher are consistent and verifiable." Jasper smirked, unshaken. Patterns or coincidences? I challenge you to produce proof beyond cryptic symbols and vague predictions. The room seemed to close in around her, the weight of dozens of eyes pressing down. Yet Ilara's mind raced. This was exactly the challenge she needed to sharpen her focus. After class, she retreated to the library's shadowed alcove, the scent of aged paper and dust enveloping her like a familiar cloak. Fingers tracing the brittle edges of the ancient tome, she whispered to herself, "I will find the proof." Meanwhile, Mina Solis sat hunched over a bank of glowing computer screens in the cramped study room of the student union. Her short, curly auburn hair caught the blue light as she scanned lines of encrypted code, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "Alara," she called softly into the phone, "you won't believe what I found. There are hidden files in the library's digital archive's encrypted layers beneath the usual catalogue. They reference the cipher and mention key dates and names linked to the cult." Ilara's breath caught. "Can you decrypt them?" Mina's voice was charged with excitement. "I'm working on it. These files could explain how the rewriting started, or who's behind it." That night, the two met in the library's dim confines, voices low amid the towering shelves. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows, dancing over the pages of both ancient manuscripts and glowing screens. Each revelation deepened the mystery, but also the danger. The lines between friend and foe blurred, and the stakes rose higher than ever. "We're onto something," Alara said, eyes shining with a mixture of fear and hope. "But Jasper's challenge means we can't afford mistakes." Mina nodded, fingers poised over the keyboard. "Then let's prove them all wrong." As the night stretched on, the shifting narratives of the books seemed to pulse in tandem with their heartbeat, the library itself a living enigma waiting to be unraveled. And Alara knew that the next moves in this deadly game would decide not just her fate, but the very nature of reality itself. The chapter closes with the echo of footsteps approaching in the darkened stacks, an unknown watcher, perhaps, or a new ally. The game, it seemed, was far from over. Alara moved with careful steps, her breathing shallow as the aged floorboards creaked softly beneath her. The air was thick with the scent of must and dust, a tangible weight pressing against her chest. She clutched the ancient tome close to her, its cryptic cipher still vivid in her mind, but tonight her focus was elsewhere. Tonight, she pursued a lead that had tugged at her curiosity ever since Professor Gray's cryptic warnings. The whispered rumors of a clandestine gathering deep within the library. Her fingers brushed against the spines of countless leather-bound books as she navigated the labyrinthian corridors, the walls seeming to close in with every step. Somewhere beyond a rustling curtain, muffled voices echoed soft, rhythmic murmurs that sent a chill racing down her spine. Ilara paused, heart hammering, and pressed herself against the cold stone wall. Through a narrow gap, she glimpsed a chamber bathed in a dim orange glow, where a circle of figures stood cloaked in black robes. Ivory masks, glimming, ornate, and unsettling, covered their faces. Each mask bore intricate carvings of twisting vines and ancient symbols, their polished surfaces reflecting the wavering candle flames. The figures moved with an eerie synchronicity, their voices rising in a low chant that reverberated through the chamber's vaulted ceiling. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. This was no mere secret society. This was the Ivory Cult, the shadowy puppeteers she had only dared suspect. Frozen, she watched as one figure stepped forward, raising a hand. The chant faltered, replaced by a tense silence. Ilara's eyes darted to the far side of the room, and there, unmasked but cloaked in shadow, stood Professor Alden Gray. His piercing blue eyes met hers for a fleeting moment, a flicker of something unreadable passing across his gaunt features. Was it warning, regret, or something darker? The sudden noise of a book falling to the floor broke the spell. Ilara started, a sharp breath escaping as several heads turned toward her hiding place. Panic surged, but before she could move, a tall figure emerged from the shadows. Librarian Marlowe, his sharp features barely visible beneath a hood, gestured for silence. Without a word, the cult members began to disperse, slipping silently into hidden exits. Ilara retreated quickly, her heart pounding as she navigated the twisting passages back toward the library's main hall. The reality of what she had witnessed settled heavily on her shoulders. The Ivory Cult was no mere legend. It was alive, active, and dangerously close. Her suspicions about Professor Gray and Librarian Marlowe now hung like a guillotine over her trust. Outside, the night air was cold and sharp, a biting contrast to the oppressive warmth within. Ilara pulled her coat tighter, the weight of the ivory masks etched into her mind. The library's secrets were darker and more tangled than she had imagined, and the circle of trust she once relied upon had begun to fracture. She knew one thing with dreadful certainty. The cult's influence was woven into the very fabric of the university, and the next move she made could change everything. But as the moon slipped behind a veil of clouds, Ilara felt a steely resolve harden inside her. If the Ivory Cult sought to control the narrative of history, then she would become the author of her own story, no matter the cost. Her journey into the shadows was only just beginning. Tonight, more than ever, Ilara Whitlock felt the unsettling pulse of change beneath the venerable shelves. The whispered conversations of pages turning themselves, rearranging, rewriting. She sat at the long oak table, the candle flickering low, casting shadows that danced like specters across the ancient tome before her. The words on the page were not as she had left them. Sentences blurred and reformed, paragraphs folding into new meanings, histories and stories colliding in restless transformation. Ilara's breath hitched as she traced a finger along a line that dissolved beneath her touch, the letters melting into a swirling script she couldn't decipher. The familiar solidity of the written word had turned liquid, and with it, the certainty of the past began to erode. In the dim glow, the tome seemed alive, a breathing, thinking entity that toyed with truth and memory. Her pulse quickened, fingers trembling as she closed the book sharply, breaking the spell. The library's silence pressed down, but it was a silence filled with tension, the kind that prickled the skin and whispered of unseen eyes. She looked up, the air thickening, the boundary between the now and what had been beginning to blur. A soft rustle echoed from the stacks. Alara's eyes darted toward the narrow aisles, where shadows pooled like ink. Mina Solis appeared, breathless, clutching a tablet that glowed with a pale blue light. "Ilara, you need to see this," she whispered, voice urgent, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and determination. Ilara rose, her legs unsteady but her resolve unbroken. Mina's tablet displayed lines of encrypted text, digital pages flickering erratically between timelines. Codes and images overlapped, the past bleeding into the present in a fractured mosaic. "The rewriting isn't just in the books," Mina said, pressing the device into Ilaros' hands. "It's in everything, the archives, the records, even the digital files. History itself is fracturing." Ilara swallowed hard, the weight of this revelation settling like a stone in her stomach. Then how do we trust anything? How do we know what's real? Before Mina could answer, a familiar, measured voice cut through the tense air. "Trust is the most fragile of constructs in a world where narratives shift like sand." Professor Alden Gray emerged from the shadows, his tall, gaunt frame silhouetted against the stained glass windows. His silver hair gleamed faintly, and his piercing blue eyes held a somber wisdom. "You both tread dangerous ground," he warned, his voice low and steady. "The rewriting books are not just texts. They are keys and chains. The Ivory cult uses them to manipulate fate itself. But beware. To become too entwined with the shifting narratives is to risk losing yourself entirely." Ilara met his gaze, the enormity of his words settling over her like a cold fog. "But if the past keeps changing, how can I fight for a future that might never be the same?" Professor Gray's eyes darkened. "By remembering who you are, even when the world around you forgets." Their conversation was abruptly interrupted by a soft footfall. Librarian Marlowe appeared at the corridor's mouth, a faint smile playing on his lips, lips that had rarely spoken more than a whisper. The narrow passage behind him was lined with ancient manuscripts whose titles shimmered and vanished like ghosts. The air was thick with a spectral silence, charged and chilling. "Curious, aren't we?" Marlowe's voice was a barely audible murmur, drifting like a shadow. "But be careful, Ilara. The more you unravel, the more the threads pull taut. Sometimes, the stories we chase end up chasing us." Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs, a mixture of suspicion and dread curling in her gut. Was Marlowe friend or foe, ally or obstacle? The library itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her next move. As the night deepened, Ilara found herself caught in a labyrinth of shifting truths. Memories, once clear and steady, now flickered like fragmented images, her sense of self fraying at the edges. The rewriting books had begun to seep beyond their pages, altering not only history but the very fabric of reality. Yet, amid the chaos, a fierce determination blazed within her. If the past was malleable, if narratives could be fractured and rewritten, then perhaps the future was not set in stone. Perhaps, just perhaps, she could carve a path through the shifting shadows and reclaim her story. But the question lingered, haunting and insistent. How could she discern the true past when the records of history were so fluid, so manipulated. And if she could not trust her own memories, how could she trust anything at all? The library loomed around her, a vast, crumbling cathedral of knowledge and secrets. Somewhere within its shifting aisles lay the answers or the traps. And Alara knew that tonight, more than ever, every step forward was a step into the unknown. The fragile line between reality and narrative was breaking, and on the other side, the truth waited, or the end. Alara closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her scattered courage. The story was still unfolding, and she would be its author or its victim. With a soft sigh, she reopened her eyes, the candlelight steady once more. The pages were shifting again, but this time she was ready to confront them. The last word would not be written without her. The candle's small, flickering flame cast long, restless shadows that danced across the walls lined with towering shelves, each packed with tomes that seemed alive in their silent mutability. Before her lay the cipher, pages yellowed and fragile, yet pulsing with a strange vitality, as if the ink itself breathed with a secret will. Her fingers traced the cryptic symbols that had become both her obsession and her curse, each line presenting a riddle, each phrase a whisper from a future yet unwritten, or perhaps already written and waiting to be revealed. The silence around her was thick but never empty. It hummed with the subtle shifts of the books, the faint rustle of unseen pages turning, rewriting, rearranging their own stories in ways that defied reason. Ilara's mind raced, tangled in the relentless tension between the cipher's cold prophecies and the flickering hope that she might somehow bend the narrative to her will. The latest revelation chilled her. The cipher did not merely predict crimes, it tethered them to an unyielding fate, as if the future were carved in stone, and she was destined to play her part. Her breath caught when she reread the passage that pointed directly to her own death, the final crime foretold. The words felt like chains tightening round her soul. Yet, beneath the dread, a stubborn ember of defiance ignited. She would not be a passive victim of this story. If the books could rewrite their pasts and futures, then perhaps she could rewrite hers too. The soft click of footsteps drew her attention. Mina Solis appeared, her auburn curls catching the dim light, eyes bright with concern and determination. "Alara," she whispered, sliding into the seat across from her, "we have to talk. This isn't just about predictions anymore. It's about control, about whether we let the story end or change it." Ilara nodded, grateful for the presence of her steadfast friend. "I've been thinking the same, but how? The cipher feels like a chain, binding everything to a predetermined outcome. What if fate is stronger than our will?" Mina's voice dropped to a fierce whisper. "Then we break the chain. We fight the story it's trying to tell us." Their conversation swirled around the library's ancient stones, a mix of skepticism and hope. They debated the nature of fate as the stained glass windows filtered the dying light into fractured colors, casting kaleidoscopic patterns on the worn floor. The library itself seemed to lean in, listening. Before Elara could respond, a tall figure emerged from the shadows, Professor Alden Gray. His silver hair and piercing blue eyes gave him the appearance of a spectral guardian of forbidden knowledge. He approached slowly, his voice low but firm. "Beware the temptation to rewrite what is already written," he warned. "The narrative you challenge is older and deeper than you realize. Defiance comes at a price." Alara met his gaze, the weight of his words settling like a cold fog. "I understand the risks, Professor, but I cannot accept a future where I am powerless." Gray's eyes softened for a moment. Then prepare yourself. The path you choose is fraught with shadows. As the professor retreated into the labyrinth of bookshelves, Alara felt the gravity of her decision pulling her toward the grand staircase that spiraled down into the heart of the library. She paused at the top, looking down into the dim expanse of endless knowledge and secrets. The interplay of light and shadow mirrored the crossroads within her, a choice between surrendering to the invisible forces, shaping her fate, or stepping boldly into the unknown to forge a new path. The library held its breath as Alara made her choice. With a steadying breath, she descended the stairs, each step a declaration of war against the deterministic cycle. Her mind sharpened, resolve hardening like tempered steel. She would become the author of her own story, no matter the cost. Yet, as the shadows lengthened and the ancient walls whispered warnings, a question lingered in the air. Was the narrative truly hers to rewrite, or was she merely a character trapped within a story penned by forces beyond comprehension? The answer would come soon enough, but for now, Alara clung to the fragile hope that free will could triumph over fate. The candle flickered once more, its light steadying as if in quiet solidarity. The shifting pages awaited her next move. The crossroads had been reached, and the story was poised on the edge of change. Alara Whitlock sat hunched over a cluttered table, the frayed edges of ancient manuscripts spilling over from beneath a glowing laptop screen. Beside her, Mina Solis tapped rapidly on the keyboard, her curly auburn hair falling into her eyes as she scrolled through encrypted digital archives. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper and dust, the dim light casting long shadows that danced like phantoms across the cracked stone walls. "Look at this," Mina whispered, nudging the screen toward Alara. "Patterns in the cipher, they're repeating in cycles. Almost like the cults trying to trap us in a loop." Alara's round glasses caught the pale light as she leaned in, her fingers tracing the cryptic symbols. "If we can crack the pattern, maybe we can predict their next move, or better yet, rewrite it." Mina's eyes shone with fierce determination. "And we won't do it alone. We need allies." The idea was daunting, yet necessary. The Ivory cult's reach was vast, and Elara's isolation had bred a growing paranoia that gnawed at her resolve. But Mina's unyielding loyalty was a lifeline, a beacon cutting through the shadowy maze of deception. Days passed in feverish collaboration. Alara cautiously recruited a handful of trusted students, those who had shown cracks in their skepticism or whispered doubts about the university's opaque authorities. Meetings were held in secret, an empty lecture hall cloaked in darkness, the echo of whispered conversations bouncing off cold stone. Strategies were drawn, cipher fragments shared, and trust slowly stitched together in the fragile fabric of their alliance. Yet, it was the moment she stepped into Professor Alden Gray's office that the weight of their endeavor truly settled upon her shoulders. The room was a sanctuary of aged books and dim lamplight, the scent of leather and ink thick in the air. Gray sat behind his desk, his silver hair catching the faint light, eyes sharp and unreadable. "Alara," he began, voiced low and lined with urgency. "The Ivory cult is more than an academic curiosity. They believe in the inevitability of destiny control through predetermination, but their certainty is also their weakness." He slid a brittle parchment across the desk, its surface marked by cryptic symbols and fragmented text. "This is a fragment of their creed, recently uncovered. It points to a final plan, one that will seal the fate they have written for you." Alara felt a shiver course down her spine. Can it be stopped? Gray's gaze softened, but the weight of his knowledge was palpable. That depends on whether you can rewrite the narrative before the last page is sealed. Leaving his office, Alara's mind raced. The cult's influence tightened like a noose, yet now she had a plan and allies. Back in the library's shadowed corners, the group worked tirelessly, piecing together the